Day 1190 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 983,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,050 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 4 tanks, 2 APVs, 18 artillery, but also noting very little in the way of Russian missiles and drones, especially in the past 2 days, which may correlate directly with their overuse of these platforms over the weekend against Ukraine. Then headed to the map and to the opposite angle, where Ukraine continued its flurriesome wave of UAVs back into Russian territory, with drones striking the microelectronics plant in Zelenograd near Moscow. One of the plant's production facilities was reportedly damaged, with microelectronics already feeling the weight of international sanctions due to their key role in this war, but now feeling the Ukrainian fixed-wing Birds of Freedom sanctions as well. Then on the map, UAVs also flew into Dubna near Moscow, onto the Konstrat UAV manufacturing facility, with Ukraine clearly going to great lengths, specifically 530 kilometers in this instance, to target key strategic military sites of the invader. Now, flights were grounded around the capital, with the Russian Ministry of Defense reporting a total of 296 incoming UAVs during the night, though it was probably closer to half of that, and claiming that 40 were shot down over Moscow. Then further east, reports online also indicated that the Marom instrument making plant in the Vladimir Oblast was also hit, with explosions also reported in Tula, but the consequences are still being confirmed on these ones. Then to Belgorod for a moment, though coming out of yesterday, as a Ukrainian MiG-29 Fulcrum drops a pair of French-supplied hammer-guided munitions on a Russian FSB border service local headquarters complex. You will notice the yellow perimeter wall, the rectangular main building, the helipad, and the classic FSB border guard architectural style, with that main building now simply demolished. Then headed down to the main map and to the continuing or developing situation at Byatar, where the AFU's 33rd Mechanized Brigade have continued to put a fight on with defensive operations on this front, but now becoming a heavily contested location beyond the main highway on the northern side. And then just next door at Vasil, with reports coming out of the AFU successfully counterattacking on this front, and a location that eventually leads to the same highway as the aforementioned Byatar. Next, headed further north on the map, in Donetsk, where Russian forces are inching closer to the border, sparing no lives of their personnel in their latest series of meat grinder assaults to reach the so far untouched Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And so, given the Kremlin's remarkably childish demeanor, they would likely consider a foot inside the territory as a full claim to the over 30,000 square kilometers of land, which comprises the oblast. Ah, Russia, just doing Russian things. Then headed up the map to a brief update on the Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk front, with some additional further marginal gains to be seen by Russian forces on both the flanks, appearing to make this the new current focus of operations in the region. Then to take a further look around the map, firstly with an ironic display of the AFU's quadcopters taunting Russian air defenses. It should of course be the other way around, as a heavy drone was troubling the Russian Tor M2, a platform that has no onboard cannons, MGs, or other kinetic weapons. And the vehicle did take a hit as it scurried away from the munition-dropping drone, but then showed itself to get away, not sustaining critical damage, so far that we know of. Now, the Tor M2s are the short-ranged air defense systems designed to operate relatively close to the front lines, so well within reach of a heavy drone, and thereby being so close to the action, they are vulnerable to counter-battery fire and those loitering munitions. But the Tor M2s are supposed to operate under the protection of supporting units. In this case, however, looking as if only to be accompanied by one Russian soldier capturing this video on his smartphone, instead of getting any real protection. Also seen around the map, warriors of the Paragon Company struck a hidden Russian tank deep in the forest. Then on the map, something you don't see every day, a heavy Nemesis drone that swoops in, not for attack or even for a supply drop, but to airlift 2 Ukrainian reconnaissance birds to safety, the Leleka 100 and the Mara. Pilots from Ukraine's 63rd Mechanized Brigade pulled off what might be a first here, rescuing the valuable drones, these recon drones, from the battlefield before the invading forces could get their hands on any intel inside. Then to something we see almost every day now, the tangled web of fiber optic drone lines from previous flights. The fiber optic lines are turning into having an increasingly unquestionable presence as they spread themselves across the battlefield. In this case, a couple of AFU soldiers decided to make a humorous video out of the matter. And you might be wondering here about the recycling for redeployment. Well, in theory, fiber optic cables can be recycled, but on the battlefield, they're usually just left behind due to being too dirty and damaged from exposure to the elements, making it too costly and time-consuming to bother. Then headed across to some news, as Germany's Taurus cruise missiles are back in the conversation at a time when Berlin communicates the lifting of range restrictions on military aid to Ukraine used against targets in the Russian territory. However, the German government maintains strategic ambiguity regarding specific arms deliveries like that of the Taurus. Germany's Foreign Minister, Johann Wadephul, stated that if Germany decides to transfer the longer-ranged Taurus missiles to Ukraine, that it would not be publicly announced, stating, quote, "We will not let Putin know what exactly we are doing." So in other words, we may know about the deliveries only after they happen. It wouldn't be the first time. Attackums comes to mind there. And then further on the Berlin and German front, President Zelensky touched down in Berlin and was welcomed by Chancellor Merz, who pledged steadfast support for Ukraine as long as necessary, quote-unquote, emphasizing how the war has reshaped ties between the two countries. The leaders met to hammer out continued German backing and tighter bilateral cooperation. As the talks unfolded, reports emerged that Germany is set to invest substantially in Ukraine's homegrown missile program, aiming to help Kyiv develop and mass-produce cruise missiles with ranges of up to 2,500 kilometers. As it stands, Ukraine has the capacity but lacks sufficient investment in its arms industry. Securing that investment would allow Ukraine to significantly boost its defense production, enhancing both its exports while simultaneously boosting its own defense capabilities. And now to the Kremlin, with sources indicating that Vladimir Putin is set to demand a written guarantee from NATO to halt its eastward expansion and lift sanctions on Russia as the price for ending the war. With the sources citing Kremlin insiders, which has more often than not come to pass as accurate. Now, further to these demands, the list also includes a neutral Ukraine, the return of frozen assets, and Moscow's classic call to protect Russian speakers in Ukraine. Kyiv, meanwhile, flatly rejects letting Moscow dictate its alliances, insisting it will not surrender the right to join NATO or the EU. Meanwhile, Russia is still yet to provide the promised memorandum of peace to the USA administration, although the contents of such a memorandum should not come as a surprise to many with what it will entail. And on that overall topic of peace and ceasefires, Russia's foreign ministry advised of a new round of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia that will be announced soon, according to Lavrov. However, at that time, the so-called chief diplomat of the Russian Federation once again voiced the Kremlin's absurd demands, including a neutral status for Ukraine and the elimination of the root causes of the conflict. So it's hard to expect much more out of the next round of bilateral talks between the two countries, with all of those Russian demands only likely to become much more unreasonable. Meanwhile, in some Russian Medvedev news, as the former one-term seat-warming Russian president, typing with one eye closed, was again trying to meet his monthly quota of threatening nuclear Armageddon if Russia isn't allowed to continue its aggressive tactics beyond its own borders, with this time responding to a Trump social media post where Medvedev threatened World War III again, though it's technically a step down from previous nuclear threats. Then headed across to some Ukrainian hardware news, as Ukraine has unveiled the Sky Sentinel, a new autonomous weapon designed specifically to counter Russian Shahed drones. At its core is an AI-powered turret equipped with a Browning M2 heavy MG, capable of providing a 360-degree defense kill zone, and tracks targets flying at up to 800 kilometers per hour. The system's artificial intelligence is trained to ignore birds and other aerial non-threats, conserving ammunition and ensuring precise engagement against actual aerial dangers. Integrated with radar, the Sky Sentinel receives real-time target data and independently manages detection, tracking, and firing without direct human intervention. Despite some skepticism about the effectiveness of the 50 caliber rounds, the turret has already downed 4 Shaheds during its combat testing phase. Each unit reportedly costs around 150k USD, which is a tiny sum per air defense unit. And developers are now working towards mass production, aiming to deliver dozens of these systems monthly. The future of warfare surprisingly looks to be cheap UAVs and even cheaper air defense munitions, combined with artificial intelligence. Then to a quick Russian hardware update. Take this example. Initially, it's a little difficult to see what's going on here, but it is a Russian Z truck, the Kamaz 5350, and with some lower side rubber sheeting designed for protection against drone threats. We've seen that before, and also with car batteries hooked up to an electronic warfare system at the top. But what this really symbolizes or speaks to is the current state of paranoia for the operators of the dwindling Russian logistics, and a reflection of the risk of the Russian army's logistical enterprises even 30 to 40 kilometers away from the front lines, as they attempt to mitigate the risks of FPV drones in all ways that they can possibly muster. Then headed across to a quick 5-second funny to round out the video today, guys, as Russia's new elite Panzer just dropped. Really, it's just a 1960-era BMP infantry fighting vehicle, with the ad hoc infield engineers not getting the memo that the modernized FPV threat contains proximity-fused, self-forging fragment warheads that voids the effectiveness of these designs, obsolete before they even ride out into battle. And so those shaped high-velocity slugs that send directly through both the cage and the tank's armor, or in this case the IFV, bypassing the protection, making this design more of a false sense of security more than anything else. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!